And today we are joined by, as we like to call it, a strategic product and digital commerce executive. Every single person here would be so interested in learning about, your time at Amazon, especially. I know I am, because we've heard so much about Amazon being like this mammoth of a supply chain, company out there. And you've kind of managed, what some of the largest brands out there as well. I would love to hear some of the, common, I would say, operational frictions that you see, across different worlds, especially like, coming from Office Depot, Staples going into Amazon and further on. Like has that changed overall, or has it been mostly the same, over the years?
I think it's changed a lot.
And from Amazon, I'm pretty sure their operating model has so many lessons that we could learn, especially during the COVID times. What do you believe are the most transferable to any enterprise out there that is traditional or non-tech or tech, that can learn from the Amazon, operating model throughout these, years and the coming years with AI and stuff?
Well, there's a lot there for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
There is this thing, I think it's called the iron triangle, right? The speed, there's customer experience, there is profitability that I think you have coined in today's, e-commerce ecosystem. How do you think leaders should actually think about balancing these three things together?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? They always say that it's like you can have two, but you can't have three. Or...
How do you think AI is impacting this overall? When you look at these three areas, especially, I guess, let me rephrase that, especially when we see digital, transformation and supply chain, people kind of put them in different buckets nowadays. What do we do that, it can be evolved together to unlock that real growth, especially with the AI and technology that we have, with us today?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? One is it's making it so much easier to
So welcome everyone to the VSERVE Ebusiness Solutions podcast on supply chain management, where we invite some of the industry's great experts to share their experiences and also gather some helpful tips along the way. I'm Cynthia, your host again, and today we are joined by, as we like to call it, a strategic product and digital commerce executive. He has spent his career architecting growth at a massive scale. He has managed $1 billion plus P&Ls at Amazon. He's led global sourcing for Office Depot and most recently transformed the digital landscape for the $50 billion supply chain giant McLane company. So please help me in welcoming Kyle Gustafsson. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here, and I hope I said your name right.
Yeah, thank you very much. Glad to be here today and excited to share some more with the audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kyle, for joining us today. I know as of now, you are a senior consultant at Impactful, and you're also managing director of BGA and Partners. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So those two are kind of in conjunction, right? Where I work a lot with Impactful and then do some other work with BJ and Partners, which is my own firm.
Wow, perfect. And I know you advise, Fortune 500 C-suite executives on how to navigate, AI now, supply chain innovation, omni-channel strategy. But obviously over the years, you've built, so many different types of teams, platforms, and you've transformed businesses. So my first question to everyone is, can you walk us through your journey? How did you end up, coming here? How was the journey like? Just a little bit about that.
Well, it took a little bit of time, but I'll try and keep it relatively short here. I actually began my career as a civil engineer, kind of following in my family footsteps. And as I tell people that engineering, well, I actually love civil engineering, but I realized that I wanted to be in the business world. And engineering did a great job of teaching me how to have a strategic approach to solving problems. That's served me well, I feel, throughout the rest of my career. And so, at the point that I decided I was interested in business, I kind of transferred into that through a company called Corporate Express and Staples, learning a lot about consumer products, how they're manufactured, where they're made, how they're, shipped from Asia or wherever in the world to the US. And that's really kind of my initial dive into
Mm-hmm.
supply chain. But again,
Mm-hmm.
leveraging that engineering background, obviously there's a lot of supply chain and building and constructing businesses or buildings and bridges. So just started to accelerate there. I spent a lot of time at Staples and Corporate Express and more time in the office products world between Office Max and Office Depot across the world.
Mm-hmm.
At one point I had 7 offices that reported to me throughout the globe, from Taiwan to Shenzhen, China, to a
Wow.
spot in the Netherlands, Hong Kong, and of course in the US. So love that part of it. And then post my office products days, I got into the digital world really in earnest with Amazon, based out of Luxembourg.
Mm-hmm.
And subsequent to that, then started more of my consulting journey with Impactful the first time in my own company as well, doing a lot of work for either CPGs or retailers, helping them kind of accelerate commerce. So I like to tell folks that, they ask me what I do, and it's really about accelerating commerce, understanding, from end to end where the right spots are to focus energy and attention to accelerate that commerce, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
improving manufacturing or improving the supply chain to deliver to a customer or to present to a customer at the right time. That's really what I love to do.
Mm-hmm.
So post Impactful, then I did spend the time, as you mentioned earlier, at McLane. McLane is
Mm-hmm.
a great company, really well established, been around a long time. Early on in their journey of digitization, and
Mm-hmm.
so I was kind of the initial VP of e-commerce at McLane, and kind of defined what that meant, from serving e-commerce retailers to also digitizing the customer experience and starting to leverage the infrastructure to provide better customer experiences, give them more opportunities for things to buy that were more relevant to customers, and understanding what was selling so that their retail customers in the convenience space
Mm-hmm.
could start to really understand trends and things at a local level to accelerate
Mm-hmm.
their purchasing and getting their customers the products they want.
Wow, that's like such a long journey that you've had, but I'm pretty sure every single person here would be so interested in learning about, your time at Amazon, especially. I know I am, because we've heard so much about Amazon being like this mammoth of a supply chain, company out there. And you've kind of managed, what some of the largest brands out there as well. I would love to hear some of the, common, I would say, operational frictions that you see, across different worlds, especially like, coming from Office Depot, Staples, going into Amazon, and further on. Like has that changed overall, or has it been mostly the same, over the years?
I think it's changed a lot. I think from folks that, we're still in the business of making and moving goods to people, right?
Mm-hmm.
That hasn't changed for a long time. It's
Yeah.
the way that we do it has changed significantly, and the approach has changed significantly. And I would give Amazon a ton of credit for changing that approach to a tech first approach
Mm-hmm.
versus a product first approach, meaning they didn't invent books, right? But they invented how to get books to the right
Yeah.
people efficiently. And that obviously blossomed into many, many other categories and items.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, that's the precipice of where we are across everything, is we're changing from this like sales led universe to a product led universe. A
Yeah.
product meaning it could be a digital product that's connecting folks in a whole different manner.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that approach of things are moving so quickly. How are you agile? How do you set up your systems infrastructure thinking to be nimble, to be able to change quickly and to evaluate continuously is
Mm-hmm.
critical at this point.
Yeah, exactly. And from Amazon, I'm pretty sure like, their operating model has so many lessons that we could learn, especially during the COVID times. What do you believe are the most like transferable to any enterprise out there that is traditional or non-tech or tech, that can learn from the Amazon, operating model throughout these, years and the coming years with AI and stuff?
Well, there's a lot there for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't, every company, Amazon and the like, definitely has their own challenges.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that I learned at Amazon that I think is applicable regardless of what business is, obviously, at the end of the day, it's delivering value to your shareholders and customers, but understanding that there are inputs that drive those outputs.
Yeah.
rather than just focusing on the sales numbers, right? That's an output number of did you give them the right product at the right time
Mm-hmm.
with the right features and functionality. And so monitoring those inputs will ultimately drive the outputs that aspiring to be.
Mm-hmm.
And that moves people further up in the transactional process of consumer goods.
Exactly. And there is this thing, I think it's called the iron triangle, right? The speed, there's customer experience, there is profitability that I think you have coined in today's, e-commerce ecosystem. How do you think leaders should actually think about balancing these three things together?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? They always say that it's like you can have two, but you can't have three. Or
Yep.
I think it's really understanding the customer needs in your specific arena, right? For instance, I've done a lot of work in the office furniture world, right? Customers don't expect to have a new office fitted out tomorrow, but they want quality that's going to last for years. They want that aesthetic that's going to meet their needs. So that's a different dynamic than if I'm, making dinner and I need milk right away,
Yeah.
right? So understanding those customers, but going even deeper. And I think a major shift that we're getting into now, which I think was very evident at Amazon, and it's becoming even more evident across everywhere, especially with the acceleration of AI, is anticipating activities
Hmm.
or anticipating demand, right? In when I started in the business world, we were reactive, right? You could look at the results and see what people were buying, and there's obviously still value in that today.
Yeah.
But more important is what are people doing that happens before that buy decision, right? Are they browsing on web pages? Just to give you a simple example, right? If
Hmm.
they're not browsing on a web page, probably aren't going to convert on that web page.
Yeah.
Just to be very succinct,
Uh-huh.
right? So the same thing goes with supply chain forecasting, right? On geographic locations for goods, etc. So we're making a big shift there for sure, and that obviously drives speed, margin, all pieces of the triangle you discussed.
Exactly. And how do you think AI is impacting this overall when you look at these three areas, especially I guess let me rephrase that. Like especially when we see digital, transformation and supply chain. People kind of put them in different buckets nowadays. Like what do we do that, it can be evolved together to unlock that real growth, especially with the AI and technology that we have with us today?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? One is it's making it so much easier to ask questions about data.
Yeah,
The challenge, though, is how well founded is the data that you're tapping into,
exactly.
which
Yeah.
is going to put a lot more pressure on the humans in the loop. I think all good, right? It's definitely accelerating things, which I think is great. We're going to see a lot more innovation a lot faster. It's just going to require a new skill set that I think, if I'm honest, everyone's going to have to learn
Yeah.
is how to factor that into every decision you're making. The autonomous aspect of it, I would say, we're a little further away than we all probably feel like we are from that. But what's going to be
Yeah.
really important in the coming days is how do you factor that in the human part to the AI part of things to make sure that you're making the
Hmm.
right decisions, and
Yeah.
empowering that. At Amazon, there's a term called hands off the wheel. So we would build out a process and look at ways to automate that. And
Hmm.
then, success was we got hands off the wheel. So it could be a 2-year, 3-year process that you wanted to get, basically have it autonomous. But that's the way I think approaching AI is going to really start to accelerate things with high quality, which is what we're all looking for.
Exactly. Like to understand exactly how it works and where it's most effective versus putting it everywhere is what the consensus has been. But when you're looking at AI roadmaps now, how data driven or decision making fundamentally changes complex P&Ls, because obviously we just spoke about that we have to be ready, we have to train ourselves, but how do you even look at them in decision making skills when we're still learning these kind of tools and I guess software that we have available right now?
Yeah, I mean it's super tough, right? Every enterprise is probably going to take on a different AI roadmap. I mean, I've talked with quite a few folks, and
Yeah.
it's like anything. It's like going to the doctor. If you're not asking the right questions or giving the right information, they
Yeah.
might send you in the wrong direction. Not because that's their intent, but because they don't have all the information.
Yeah.
right? So I think it's really important, and a lot of people are starting with like tangible metrics, right, of productivity improvements or
Hmm.
reducing costs, which makes a lot of sense, which is very tangible. And then the most mature are, as I said, getting very anticipatory,
Yeah.
right? Of, hey, I have this signal, which means I need to have inventory in this location, this 3 days before this customer is going to buy, because there's an 85% chance that that customer is going to buy. That's very advanced, but I think for most folks and most enterprises, starting with, hey, where can I make some impact?
Hmm.
Where can I look at my process and have it help me accelerate that process? I build the confidence and trust, and I build the data to support it properly. And then, move it as quickly as possible and make it autonomous if that's where it needs to be, or manage it with a leaner set of resources.
Exactly. And from your experience, I guess, when you're looking at companies, you're obviously like, these two types of companies. One is traditional that does not want to like, jump on the bandwagon of the new trends that are going on in the industry. And then there's one that wants to just do everything. So how do you, separate those kind of companies, and how do you, kind of walk them through success, especially when they are going through these decisions, especially during their pilot phases.
Yeah, it's tough, right? I mean, everybody has limited resources,
Yeah.
and I think there's you got to be true to your strategy and your DNA as a company. I always said when I was in the private label business, we were always going to be a fast follower, right? We weren't going to be the innovators in product, but we clearly knew our perspective there, right? So using that as an example, if I can get as much information and data as possible on what's moving and where the trends are, then I can act quickly on that.
Exactly.
So I think if every enterprise kind of knows where they sit in that, right?
Hmm.
If they have a culture, financial well-being to take a lot of bets and test a lot of things in the AI world, that can be done.
Hmm.
I would probably be a little bit more pragmatic until
Hmm.
you have the process and kind of build a process on how do you quantify what the impact is. What's your approach? How are you learning? What engagements do you have? How is this going to be scaled across your enterprise?
Hmm.
And then on the kind of the more traditional side, where's your biggest hole that you need to fill or fix? And is that going to help you do that, right? What's the impact? Obviously, there's a lot of business case review to understand what the impact could be. And then what do you want the future DNA to be? Because that, I mean, things are only going to move faster and faster, especially I've done a lot of work in the distribution space. Things are moving a lot faster.
Yep.
And I expect that space to be really disrupted in the
Hmm.
next 5 to 10 years, um, because of the lag in technical aptitude.
Yeah.
Just to be honest, maybe it's not aptitude, it's just adoption is probably a better term. When everybody's got buildings and tech can accelerate the data connections, then you're down to the capital assets are the only kind of leverage that create a unique moat for those folks. So I expect there to be a lot of disruption there.
Perfect. And when you're talking about all these change, obviously the change management aspect of it, looking at using one e-commerce platform, that's what we're seeing for multiple brands or diverse channels. Is there like a rule book that you use when you approach these kind of change management for these companies? Anything like that?
I don't know about a rule book, but I think it's a super complicated process, right?
Yeah.
And typically, especially in kind of a consulting or an advisory space, I always try and understand the whys behind the decisions that were made previous
Yeah.
to engagement, and then what the vision is to get to. And then my role is to kind of advise on how to make those connections and where to
Mhm.
start and
Mhm.
stop. And it usually those things kind of drive out what features and functionality you need out of platforms or tools, which then drive the pieces and parts that are really good to connect those things together. And I think every solution provider out there would say there's something that they're really good at and their bread and butter.
Yeah.
Very few are good at a lot of things.
Yeah.
And my advice in every instance is it takes a lot of effort from the business owner and their staff to make sure that it's running the way they want it to run, right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly. So have you got any, like, I guess, a success story that you would like to share with us, that kind of talks about this, where you delivered, an impact on the bottom line with the teams and everyone?
yeah, I think there's a lot of them. I
Yeah.
think a lot of things. I mean, one that kind of when you bring that up, it reminds me of I did some work for a beverage brand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is early on in kind of their e-commerce selling journey.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in very sales under, I mean, they understood consumer goods sales, but e-commerce was a whole different deal. And what they didn't realize is the intimate connection to supply chain and
Mm-hmm.
efficiency in supply chain that actually drove their growth in e-commerce.
Mm-hmm.
And so this particular brand, we went through a whole basically supply chain and e-commerce redesign.
Mm-hmm.
It exploded their sales and it changed their costs significantly. They
Yeah.
went from traditional fulfillment models to basically micro fulfillment in a drop ship mechanism that reduced costs very significantly. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't necessarily want to share all the numbers, but
Yeah.
massively, and kind of change their whole business model. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities out there like that, and there's a lot of folks innovating, and I think that's why it's super fun to be in the space right now.
Yeah. Well, how do you personally, I guess, evaluate, the digital initiative, I guess, is this is how it creates value or, technologically, God, I can't say that word today.
Mhm.
Technologically, it's impressive and it kind of fits into this platform. So how do you personally evaluate that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's always a short-term and long-term factor that needs to be played in.
Hmm.
I mean, we typically, especially if you're working in the public world, get down to, hey, what's going to happen next quarter?
Yeah.
But I think long-term thinking is required now, but not being stubborn on long-term thinking,
Hmm.
meaning set a vision, understand you're going to have to iterate to get to that vision.
Hmm.
And so therefore, whatever you're doing, especially in the digital space,
Yeah.
I don't think the sizzle is always worth it, right? Unless you have a really good way to learn
Uh-huh.
quickly. And so if you understand how to learn quickly and that you learn quickly to align with your long-term vision, that will make it worth it. But you can get caught chasing a lot of shining objects if you're in a short-term perspective of, hey, this is just going to solve my problem quickly. Because as I said earlier, that ownership and application specifically to your business is the unique differentiating part
Hmm.
that we're all working for, and that's why we have so many strong enterprises out there. They've figured out their whys like that.
Exactly. And I'm pretty sure you also have, so many stories where you did give them some advice, but they didn't take them. Like, some common mistakes that they make on like a regular basis or just like, on a normal day where they're not really thinking about integrating supply chain strategy with a broader, digital commerce platform like those traditional companies. I would love to hear, some of the common mistakes, I guess, that executives make when making these kind of decisions.
That's a great question. I think I don't know if it's specific to that, but I think there's always a question of what is kind of the catalyst to change, and
Hmm.
am I investing in the catalyst to change? I think that's a super question, right?
Hmm.
Or am I super confident in the strong foundation to make things happen, right? From a digital perspective, do you have if you don't have that set up, like you don't have a strong catalog set up, it's really hard to have a good e-commerce site.
Yeah, exactly.
Or I mean, so that's just an example, right? Or
Yeah.
without strong item data, how are you going to understand that, or strong demand, etc. So there's a lot of things that I think that are really critical to evaluate from an executive perspective to
Hmm.
make sure you have the foundation set, and then have the process to learn what the right digital or e-commerce solution is on top of that.
Exactly.
And I would encourage that kind of thinking over and over
Hmm.
versus, hey, I need a CRM. Okay, well, plug a CRM in. It's not necessarily that easy. Why do you want a CRM? Do you have the supporting infrastructure to accelerate that CRM? Do you
Hmm.
have the right processes and people to do that?
No.
You know, or do you have solutions that you're going to have to build around that as well? Just using that as an example.
Exactly, like the why behind, what, like why do you want it, why do you need it, kind of the thing, right? So, completely agree with you there. And then looking ahead, like say, 10 years, 15 years down the line, I know there's going to be so many, changes with obviously digital transformation, AI. kind of understanding where we need it, how we need it, maybe a more refined versions of a lot of these things. Capabilities do you think will define the next generation, the high performing commerce or supply chain organizations when you look at, the next 10 to 15 years of digital transformation?
Yeah, this is, I mean, it's a super interesting one. You just brought some thoughts in my head of like, our relationships, our customer supplier relationships are absolutely going to change.
Yep.
I think they're actually going to get richer, to be honest with you, because I think, we as humans need human interaction.
Yep.
But I think those that when I say they're going to get richer, they're going to be a lot more data driven and human driven.
No.
And that's going to be a lot more substantiative. The companies that understand that most effectively are, I think, going to be the ones that excel, right? I mean, the pendulum kind of swings both ways. Everybody says, "Hey, at Amazon, it's really hard to talk to a person."
Yeah.
So they've done it really digitally, but that's not going to work in every industry,
Yeah.
right? And obviously, completely manually is not going to work either. So you have to have somewhere in between, and I
Yeah.
think the richest is somewhere in between there.
Exactly. Kyle, I'm having a lot of fun in these discussions. I love talking about digital transformation and AI, but I know we're getting close to our time. So I'll ask you my final question, because I always ask this question to everyone before they leave, is from all the experiences that you've gained, so far, and that you are looking forward to, what is, your top three advices that you would love to give out to our future leaders in supply chain, and, something that they should look forward to?
Hmm. It's a great question. I don't know if I have three specific, but the first one is this is actually, I think, a Brene Brown quote of, "I'm not here to be right, I'm here to get it right."
Uh-huh.
Taking that approach to things kind of sets you as a humble but confident leader of, you have a process to solve problems, but not overconfidence to make sure you've got it all figured out. I think being flexible and malleable, and I guess I had a boss that told me two things, like, your job as a leader is to connect dots and disparate dots, right? So if marketing is running an event that's going to impact your supply that's 8 weeks ahead of time or out,
Yeah.
you need to be on top of things like that.
Hmm.
And then the last piece of advice he told me, which I think is more relevant now than ever, is your job is to spin plates and keep them spinning, right? So you got
Yeah.
to pick which plates you're going to spin, and
Uh-huh.
make sure you're focused on spinning those plates, and a lot of them. But so I think the ages of complete, like, isolation or specific tasks is
Yeah.
especially in the leadership realm, it's probably gone. You need to really understand 80% of a lot of fields to make sure that you're
Exactly.
super effective.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with you, Kyle. It's been such fun to have this conversation with you, and to put things into such a easy perspective for us to understand. And I would love to, have this conversation further, but looking at the time, I would love to end the podcast here. But do you have any, last thoughts, any, last quotations that you want to share with our audience today?
No, no, I appreciate the time today, Cynthia, and I appreciate the audience engaging, and would be happy to follow up with any questions or thoughts or comments or disagreements, anything to generate a conversation, and, that helps us all grow together. So I really appreciate you guys putting this together and sharing it out, and love the community.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time, Kyle. It was great connecting with you and learning a little bit more about the digital transformation supply chain. And looking forward to, another sit down with you. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you very much, Cynthia.